All right, ready to dive into a deep dive, one that's been puzzling minds for, well, centuries.
Buckle up.
Today, we're tackling philosophy.
And not just, the pondering life with a cup of coffee kind of philosophy.
Right. We're going deeper.
We're talking about the really big stuff. Existence, knowledge, morality, the kind of stuff that sticks with you.
Exactly. We're going deep, uncovering the core ideas and thinkers that make up, like, the foundation of philosophy.
It's more engaging than you might think.
Way more engaging than those dusty old textbooks. Right?
Absolutely.
So think of this as like a crash course or maybe a crash reread. Whatever helps you ace that intro to philosophy exam.
What I find fascinating is how much of what we consider common sense today actually has its roots in philosophical thought.
It's true.
Yeah.
So let's start unpacking this. If someone asks, what is philosophy? How would you answer?
Honestly, I wouldn't start with a dictionary definition.
All
I'd
right.
probably say something like, imagine questioning everything you thought you knew.
Ooh, I like that.
Why are we here? What even is reality? How do we know anything for sure? These are the questions, the big questions, that have fueled philosophy for millennia.
It's true. It's like philosophy is the parent almost of all these different disciplines. Always questioning, analyzing, pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Exactly. And like any good parent, it's influenced some pretty important things. Science, politics, art.
Oh, yeah?
They all owe something to philosophy, to that rigorous thinking that defines it.
Okay, so it's not all abstract concepts then. This stuff has real-world implications.
Huge implications. It shapes how we interact with the world, how we treat each other.
Absolutely. Okay, so to understand these implications, we need to dig into the core branches, right?
Physics.
For example, that one wrestles with the very nature of reality itself.
What exists, and how could we even know that? It's the kind of stuff that makes you really think.
It really does.
Yeah.
And then there's epistemology, all about knowledge, right?
How do we acquire knowledge? Is it just our senses? Is it reason? Or something else entirely?
Some mysterious combination.
Maybe.
And of course, we can't forget ethics. This is a big one.
What's right? What's wrong? And how do we navigate all those gray areas in between?
Not easy.
Not at all. Understanding concepts like justice, fairness, the good life.
It gets complicated.
It does.
So we've got reality, knowledge, morality. That's already a lot. What else?
Well, there's logic. Logic focuses on the principles of sound reasoning, how to build strong arguments, spot fallacies.
That's essential. Not just for philosophy students either.
Definitely not. It's essential for navigating, well, the world. We're bombarded with information now more than ever. Being able to think critically, that's crucial.
That's true. And then there's political philosophy. What makes a good government? Individual liberty versus the common good.
These questions have shaped civilizations, sparked revolutions.
It's amazing to think about. And you know what's interesting? All of these branches, they might have different focuses, but they're all connected.
They really are. A giant tapestry of thought, logic, ethics, metaphysics, all woven together.
So where do we begin unraveling this tapestry?
Well, we have to travel back in time a bit, back to the birthplace of Western philosophy.
Ancient Greece.
Exactly. And there's no better place to start than with Socrates.
Socrates. Even I, a humble podcast host, know that name.
He's a philosophical rock star.
He is. What made him so revolutionary?
Socrates changed how we approach knowledge, how we understand truth. He didn't just lecture. He believed that true knowledge, it came from questioning, challenging assumptions.
That's where the Socratic method comes in.
Exactly. Imagine you're in ancient Athens, just going about your day.
Okay.
And suddenly Socrates approaches you. He's got this mischievous look in his eye, and he starts peppering you with questions. Questions designed to expose the flaws in what you believe.
I can see why he was both revered and feared.
Oh, absolutely. He ruffled some feathers. In fact, he was put on trial, sentenced to death, all for corrupting the youth with his ideas.
Talk about dedication.
Right. But thankfully, his ideas didn't die with him. His student, Plato, took those ideas and ran with them.
Ugh. Plato. Another one for the history books. What was his deal?
Plato was obsessed with this idea of ideal forms.
Ideal forms.
Imagine, like, the perfect blueprint for everything. A perfect circle, a perfect tree, a perfect system of justice. Plato believed these ideal forms existed in a separate reality.
Wait, so there's the reality we experience?
Yeah.
And then this other perfect reality where the true essence of everything actually lives.
You got it. He believed the physical world. It's just a pale imitation of this other realm, these eternal, unchanging forms.
Wow. Okay. So how do we tap into that?
That's where his famous allegory of the cave comes in.
Ah, yes. The allegory of the cave.
Ever heard of it?
I have. But those philosophical allegories, sometimes they feel like riddles wrapped in enigmas.
I get it. So picture this. You're chained inside a cave your whole life. All you've ever seen are shadows on the wall. Shadows cast by objects passing in front of a fire. You think those shadows are reality. And then one day, you break free. You stumble out into the sunlight.
Blinding, I imagine.
Completely. You're confronted with the actual world. And you realize those shadows. Just a pale imitation.
So that's what philosophy is. Breaking out of the cave.
For Plato, yes, it's the journey from the shadows of illusion to the light of true knowledge. Those who make it out, they become the philosophers.
The enlightened ones.
Exactly. They understand true knowledge doesn't lie in our senses, but in grasping those eternal forms.
Plato really was the idealist, wasn't he?
He was. But luckily, we have his student Aristotle to bring us back down to earth a bit.
Ah, so it's Aristotle who brings us back to reality. Tell me more.
If Plato was the head-in-the-clouds idealist, Aristotle was his grounded counterpart.
I like the sound of that.
He was all about observation, logic, the natural world. He believed that by studying the world around us carefully and meticulously, we could uncover real truths.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating tension already. The idealist versus the realist. Abstract forms versus the tangible world. What happens next?
Well, these ideas from ancient Greece, they didn't just disappear. They became the foundation for centuries of philosophical debate.
That makes sense. They're pretty foundational. So what comes next? Who are the next big names in our philosophical journey?
Well, fast forward a bit and we encounter a clash. Two philosophical titans, rationalism and empiricism.
Oh, that sounds intense. Break it down for us. Who are the key players?
In one corner, we have rationalism, championed by thinkers like René Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Of course.
Rationalists believe that reason is the ultimate source of knowledge. Logic, deduction, those aha moments of pure thought.
So it's that feeling when you finally understand a difficult concept, your brain just clicks.
Exactly, like solving a complex puzzle. But in the other corner, we have empiricism. Think John Locke. Empiricists argue that our sensory experiences, that's the foundation of knowledge. We learn by observing, experimenting, gathering data.
So it's about what we learn through our senses,
Right.
through actually experiencing the world.
Precisely. It's a debate that's been raging for centuries. Are we born with innate ideas? Or are our minds blank slates, ready to be written on by experience?
Nature versus nurture, but for knowledge. Fascinating. Where does Immanuel Kant fit into all of this?
Kant. Always a key player. He attempted to bridge this gap, this divide between rationalism and empiricism. His solution: transcendental idealism.
Transcendental idealism. Okay, that one might need a bit of unpacking.
It's a mouthful, I know.
Yeah.
Basically, Kant argued that our minds aren't just passively receiving information. Yes, our experiences are shaped by our senses, but we also have innate structures of thought. Categories like space, time, causality. These categories, they help us organize and make sense of our experiences.
So it's not just what we perceive, but how our minds interpret that information. We're not just viewers, we're also editors of our own reality shows.
You got it. Kant's ideas were revolutionary because they suggested that reality, at least how we experience it, is partly a product of our own minds, not just an objective thing out there.
Mind-blowing. It really makes you think about the limits of what we can know.
Exactly. And it raises all sorts of other questions. Questions about objectivity, about subjectivity. But to explore those, we need to shift gears a bit from metaphysics and epistemology to the realm of ethics.
Ethics. The branch of philosophy that deals with right and wrong, good and evil.
And those questions, they don't exactly have easy answers, do they?
Not at all. Because what's considered ethical can change so much. It depends on culture, on historical context, on individual beliefs.
It's messy.
Absolutely. But that's what makes it so fascinating to study. Ethics challenges us. It makes us examine our own values, grapple with those difficult dilemmas, consider different perspectives. What does it even mean to live a good life?
Big questions. So how do we even begin to untangle all of this? What are some of the key ethical frameworks that philosophers have developed over the years?
Well, buckle up, because we're about to enter the arena of ethical theories, where different schools of thought battle it out for moral supremacy. And in this corner, we have one of the heavyweights, utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. I've heard of this one. It's about maximizing happiness, right?
Yeah.
The greatest good for the greatest number of people.
You got it. Utilitarianism, championed by thinkers like John Stuart Mill, argues that the morally right action is the one that produces the most happiness. It's all about consequences. You weigh the potential outcomes, and you choose the path that leads to the most overall happiness, even if it means making some tough choices.
Like a moral cost-benefit analysis. So you're always aiming for the greatest good, even if it means sometimes sacrificing the needs of the few for the benefit of the many.
Exactly. And one of the most famous thought experiments used to illustrate this ethical dilemma is the trolley problem.
Ooh, the trolley problem. This is a classic. For those who haven't had the pleasure of wrestling with this one, can you set the scene for us?
Absolutely. Picture this. A runaway trolley is barreling down the tracks, headed straight for 5 unsuspecting people. You see a lever. If you pull it, you can divert the trolley onto a different track, but there's one person standing on that track.
Oh no. What a choice. So what's the dilemma?
The dilemma is this. Do you sacrifice one life to save 5? Or do you do nothing and watch as tragedy unfolds?
A philosophical gut punch, for sure. What's a utilitarian to do?
Well, a strict utilitarian would say, pull the lever. You're maximizing happiness, even though it comes at a terrible cost.
Logically, I get it. Emotionally, it's a tough pill to swallow. Like, are we okay with playing God with people's lives, even in the name of the greater good?
That's a core criticism of utilitarianism. It can sometimes feel cold, calculating.
It does. So what's the alternative?
Well, there are a bunch of ethical theories out there, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. But one of the most influential alternatives to utilitarianism is deontology, and the champion of deontology, Immanuel Kant.
Kant is back. Of course he is. What's his take on all of this?
Kant was all about universal moral principles. He believed that morality wasn't about calculating consequences like some kind of ethical accountant. It was about following universal moral rules, regardless of the outcome. For Kant, the ends never justify the means. It's the means themselves that matter most.
So it's about doing the right thing for the right reasons, even if it might lead to a less happy outcome in the short term.
Exactly. Lying is always wrong, even if it could prevent someone's feelings from being hurt. Stealing is always wrong, even if you're doing it to feed your starving family. It's about upholding those absolute moral principles, no matter what.
We've gone from calculating happiness to upholding absolute rules. Talk about a philosophical pendulum swing.
And just like with any pendulum, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. But that's the beauty of philosophy. It gives us all these different lenses through which to view the world.
I like that. So it's about asking the tough questions, even if it leads to more questions. And it's about having these debates, these dialogues that have been going on for centuries.
You've got it. And speaking of complexity and ambiguity,
Right.
no philosophical deep dive would be complete without at least mentioning existentialism.
All right, let's do it. Existentialism, the philosophy that makes you question everything, even getting out of bed in the morning.
Huh. It's not all doom and gloom. Existentialism, popularized by thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, isn't just about despair. It's about freedom. It's about taking responsibility for our choices, creating meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
So we acknowledge that we're not handed a script. We have to write our own, even if it means staring into the void.
Exactly. Existentialists emphasize our freedom. We're free to define who we are, what we believe, how we want to live, even if the universe doesn't seem to care.
It's both liberating and terrifying, I'd imagine.
It is, but that's the human condition.
It really is. This is all so fascinating, but before we spiral too far down that rabbit hole,
Right.
let's talk about why any of this matters, especially for those who are just starting their philosophical journeys.
I like that because sometimes it can feel like philosophy is just, a bunch of old philosophers arguing about things that don't matter anymore, but that's not true at all, is it?
Not at all. Philosophy is for everyone. It's about asking big questions, challenging what you think you know, and never losing that sense of wonder.
Exactly. And it's about engaging with those big conversations that have shaped human thought for centuries.
So, to our listeners, keep those philosophical fires burning, engage with these ideas, debate them, and never stop questioning the world, because that's what philosophy is all about.
It's about embracing curiosity, challenging assumptions, and never losing sight of those big, important questions that have always captivated us. Welcome back, philosophy fans. Last time, we left off with Socrates stirring things up in ancient Athens. Remember him?
Oh, I remember Socrates, quite the character.
Yeah.
But we're talking about his student now, right? Plato.
That's right. Plato took those disruptive ideas, those questions, and he wove them into a whole philosophical system.
Plato. Another name you hear echoing through history, right? I always picture those marble busts, serious expression, flowing beard.
Classic philosopher look.
Exactly. So what's Plato's claim to fame in the world of philosophy?
Plato was fixated on this idea of ideal forms.
Ideal forms. Okay, now you have to explain that one.
Think of it like this. Imagine the perfect blueprint for everything. A perfect circle, a perfect tree.
I like where this is going.
Even a perfect justice system.
Sure.
Plato believed these ideal forms, these perfect blueprints, they existed in a separate reality, a cosmic design studio, if you will.
Hold on. A separate reality. You mean there's the reality we see, touch, experience, and then there's this other, more perfect reality, where the true essence of things actually resides.
You got it. He believed the world we experience, just a pale imitation, an imperfect reflection of these eternal, unchanging forms. And to really illustrate this, he gave us the allegory of the cave.
Okay, the allegory of the cave. I've heard of this one, but I'll be honest, sometimes these philosophical allegories can feel a bit like riddles wrapped in enigmas.
I hear you. Let me break it down. Picture this. You're chained inside a cave, your whole life, and all you've ever seen are shadows. Shadows projected on the wall, shadows cast by objects passing in front of a fire.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
So you, trapped in this cave, you mistake these shadows for reality. This is all you know. But then, one day, you break free.
Dramatic. I like it.
You stumble out of that cave into the blinding sunlight, and you see the real world. The vibrant actual world. And you realize those shadows, they were just a pale imitation of the real thing.
Yeah, I think I see where you're going with this. So for Plato, that's what philosophy is, breaking free from the cave, that ascent from illusion to true knowledge.
Exactly. It's about seeing the light, both literally and metaphorically. And those who break free, those who see the light, they become the philosophers. They're the ones who can see reality for what it truly is.
So they've graduated from the school of hard knocks. Or maybe the school of shadowy caves.
Something like that. They understand that real knowledge, true knowledge, it isn't found in the physical world. It's about grasping those eternal, unchanging forms.
Plato was quite the idealist, wasn't he? Living in that world of perfect forms.
He was. But luckily, we have his student, Aristotle, to bring us back down to earth a bit.
Ah, Aristotle. This is a name I know even without the philosophy deep dive.
He was quite the polymath. If Plato was all about those abstract forms, Aristotle was much more grounded. He was all about observation, about logic, about the natural world.
So while Plato was off searching for truth in some other dimension, Aristotle was rolling up his sleeves and studying actual trees.
Pretty much. He believed that by carefully observing the world around us, we could uncover real universal truths.
Okay, so we've got Plato, the idealist, and Aristotle, the realist. It's an interesting dynamic. What direction does philosophy take after these two titans?
Well, it's not a straight line, that's for sure. But those ancient Greek ideas, they didn't just fade away. They became the foundation for centuries of debate and new ideas.
That makes sense. So who picks up the philosophical torch next?
Well, we start to see a clash between two major schools of thought, rationalism and empiricism.
Ooh, that sounds like it could get heated. Rationalism versus empiricism. What are we talking about here?
On one side, we have rationalism. Thinkers like René Descartes, the I think, therefore I am guy.
I think, therefore I am on this philosophy podcast. I like it.
Rationalists believe that reason is the ultimate source of knowledge. We're talking logic, deduction, those aha moments when you figure something out using just your mind.
So it's about the power of thinking things through, of using your brain to unlock truths.
Exactly. But then, in the other corner, you have empiricism. Thinkers like John Locke. Empiricists would say, hold on a minute. It's our senses, our experiences that really matter. We learn by observing, experimenting, gathering data about the world.
So it's not just about what's going on in our heads, it's about what we experience out in the world.
Precisely. And this debate, this back and forth between rationalism and empiricism, it gets to the heart of how we understand knowledge itself. Are we born with certain ideas, or are our minds like blank slates, ready to be written on by experience?
It's like the nature versus nurture debate, but for knowledge. So where do we go from here? Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from ancient Greece to the clash of rationalism and empiricism. What's next on our philosophical road trip?
Well, we can't talk about philosophy without talking about ethics.
Right, ethics. Because it's one thing to ponder, the nature of reality, but we also have to live in the world. We have to make choices.
Exactly, and those choices, they have consequences. So how do we decide what's right, what's wrong?
That's where ethical theories come in, right?
Exactly. They're like different frameworks, different ways of approaching these questions.
Like moral roadmaps to help us navigate those tricky situations.
Something like that. And two of the most influential frameworks out there, utilitarianism and deontology.
Okay, those ring a bell. But a little refresher never hurts. Let's start with utilitarianism. What's the core idea?
So utilitarianism, championed by thinkers like John Stuart Mill, argues that the morally right action is the one that leads to the greatest happiness. For the greatest number of people, it's all about the consequences, you see. The greater good.
So it's kind of like a moral cost-benefit analysis.
In a way, yes. You weigh the potential outcomes and you choose the action that you think will create the most happiness overall, even if it's a tough choice.
Even if it feels counterintuitive or maybe a little uncomfortable?
Sometimes, yes. And a classic example used to illustrate this is, of course, the trolley problem.
Ah, the trolley problem. A philosophical classic. It's a tough one. For those who haven't encountered this thought experiment, can you set the scene?
Okay, so imagine this. A runaway trolley is barreling down the tracks.
Oh, no.
And there are 5 people tied to the tracks. They can't escape.
It's already stressful.
I know, right? But here's the thing. You're standing near a lever, and if you pull this lever, you can divert the trolley onto a side track.
Okay, there's a glimmer of hope.
There is, but here's the catch. There's one person tied to the side track.
Oh, no. So it's a terrible, impossible choice.
Exactly. Do you sacrifice one life to save 5? Or do you do nothing and the trolley kills 5 people? What's the right thing to do?
That is the trolley problem in a nutshell.
Mm.
So what does a good utilitarian do?
A utilitarian would argue that you pull the lever, you sacrifice one life tragically to save 5, you've maximized happiness, even if it comes at a cost.
It makes sense logically, but it's still such a difficult dilemma. Are we really okay with deciding who lives and who dies, even for the greater good?
That's one of the main criticisms of utilitarianism.
Yeah.
That it can sometimes be, well, a little cold and calculating. It can prioritize those outcomes over individual rights.
It can feel like you're ignoring those moral instincts, that gut feeling that some things are just wrong no matter the outcome.
Right.
So is there another way to think about these ethical dilemmas?
There are many, but a prominent alternative to utilitarianism is deontology.
Deontology. Now that one sounds familiar too, but refresh my memory.
The champion of deontology is our old friend Immanuel Kant.
Kant. Back again. I knew it. What's his take on ethics?
For Kant, it wasn't about calculating happiness. It wasn't about consequences at all. He believed morality was about following universal moral rules, no matter what.
So, regardless of the outcome.
Exactly. The ends never justify the means, according to Kant. It's the means themselves that are important, the actions themselves.
So give me an example. How does that work in the real world?
Well, for Kant, lying is always wrong. Even if a little white lie could prevent someone's feelings from being hurt. Stealing is always wrong, even if you're doing it to help someone who's struggling. It's about upholding those absolute moral principles.
So we've swung from calculating happiness to upholding absolute rules. 2 very different approaches.
That's the thing about philosophy. It provides us with all these frameworks, these different ways of looking at the same questions, and the truth. It's often messy and complicated.
And that's what makes it so interesting to talk about. We're grappling with big questions with different perspectives.
Yeah.
There's no one right answer. It's about the process of thinking these things through.
Exactly. It's about constantly challenging your own assumptions and being open to new ways of seeing the world.
And it's about continuing those conversations that have been going on for centuries, right?
Exactly. Because these questions, they're still relevant today. They still matter.
They do. All right. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our philosophical deep dive.
For now.
For now. But to all our listeners, remember, keep those philosophical fires burning. Keep asking questions, keep challenging yourself, and keep exploring the big ideas, because that's what philosophy is all about.
Absolutely. The journey never really ends.